Knowledge of the lands our ancestors come from are rare. Most information is word of mouth, about terrible monsters and rots spreading across the world. Fairy tales, really. The journey to the Isles, though, that we have evidence for, and I find far more interesting. Only 3 of the 28 ships that set out on the expedition made it, but on those ships, there was surviving evidence of what happened on that 50-year journey across the rotting sea. The journey hit its first road bump almost a week after getting on open waters. The waves became more intense and thunderstorms became constant. According to written testimonies, it stormed for months straight, and the waves would rip apart 8 of the ships. Some would even speak of waves so large they swallowed some ships whole. The remaining ships would eventually free themselves from the storm. They would face a different problem. The plague the sailors had thought they had left behind had in fact followed them on board. The creeping rot is a disease. What kind? We're not fully sure. Unfortunately, most information on the illness was on the ships infected by it, and those ships were sunk by the others. Perhaps the fact that so many agreed with such a drastic choice says enough about the illness, but I've managed to piece together quite a bit about it. It seems that any contact at all with someone carrying the creeping rot is enough to infect you, and once infected, it spreads across the body. Black mold growing on the skin and shutting down the organs. Eventually, the bodies themselves would turn into mold spores, most likely to facilitate more spreading of the infection. Though they would try their best, records indicate that after several years, at some point the ships showing cases of the creeping rot were sunken by the others, in hopes of sending the sickness into the deep sea below them. Unfortunate, truly, how much knowledge is lost to the rotting sea, and the fear of people who had no mind for preserving history. The open ocean is an unforgiving place, and the things that live in it, like all animals, need to feed, and the remaining 16 ships in the fleet of the New World were floating buffets for anything big enough to try. I've always had a passing interest in krakens. They're not a species found here in the Isles, but from testimonials, they're massive creatures, able to wrap their entire bodies around a caravel, and strong enough to crack hull and rip sail post apart. A single kraken followed the caravan for weeks, and would in total sink 3 ships, and consume the crew and passengers, before just as suddenly as it appeared, abandoning its pursuit. It's possible that, unintentionally, they sailed into its usual hunting grounds, or some sort of breeding area. Or perhaps it left them alive, because they were sailing into worse predator territory. Leviathans do live in the Isles, though rarely do they surface high enough to bother the sailors. They're creatures with massive appetites, usually hunting on whales or other predators. They travel in packs, meaning what part of their life isn't spent traveling are spent eating. Rising from the depths of the sea, a family of Leviathans picked off 5 of the ships, 2 of which were trying to rescue survivors from the 3 destroyed initially by the creatures, before the crew of the remaining 8 would throw barrels of food stores into the water to distract them so they could survive. Not that they had much food to spare. Supplies were low, and morale must have been even lower. After leaving the Leviathan's hunting grounds, the waters finally seemed to calm, almost unnaturally so. It would have been a relief to the survivors if they weren't starving and dying of dehydration. The sky had now cleared of all clouds, but under the beating sun there was no rain to catch, and any attempt at fishing gave no results. Unfortunately, I've been unable to determine how long they sailed through that part of the sea, because all of the diary entries I've seen are contradictory. Some claim they spent years surviving off eating barnacles off the edge of the ship and boiling seawater till it was just barely drinkable. Other sources claim they simply laid on the deck for days until finally relief came in the form of the fog. Another mystery of the journey, the fog that rolled in thick and blocking the ships from the sun and each other. There were no entries from inside the fog, no word of what occurred or how long they were there for. The only thing we know is 8 ships went into the fog, and only 5 came out. Once they had left the fog, the situation was becoming dire for the survivors, because while the weather had returned to normal and the fish were once again biting, the people had been beaten down and exhausted, and they turned their anger to the captains of the remaining ship. They were on the edge of mutiny when the next disaster struck. It starts when a carpenter, cleaning barnacles off the ship, revealed the other hitchhiker on board. a large spider crab-like creature that had hidden between the barnacles, and when disturbed, the creature would sink its teeth into the man's hand. And from the stories written after, it would sink 2 long tentacles into the man's skin, releasing a venom that would paralyze its victim. The crab would release a series of clicking noises that would awaken others hidden on the hull, and they would crawl out and onto the ship, repeating the process with everyone on board. Once their prey was paralyzed, they would begin to consume their victims, and according to the people who jumped ship and swam to different boats, many of those people were alive while being eaten. A shame no one managed to bring back a specimen, even a dead one. But 2 of the ships were left at sea, ghost ships full of nothing but corpses. The final 3 ships were overcrowded with people, and the tension had reached a boiling point. It was on the dawn of change that the bravery and ambition of a young bosun would lead to a mutiny. The previous captain of the Dawn of Change was an old but firm man who stood no chance against the crowd that broke into his quarters, nor the duel the bosun challenged him to. Stories conflict on what happened to the captain's body after he was killed. Some claim they strung up his body as a warning to the remaining 2 ships to fall in line. Others say they threw it overboard as if it were trash. Personally, I can only see one outcome for when a group of emancipated people are suddenly in possession of meat. Whatever happened, the remaining 2 ships, the God-Breaker and the Renewed Spirit, would follow the Dawn of Change, as finally, after years at sea, they would follow a bird to landfall. Only a day after stepping onto solid ground for the first time in 50 years, the survivors of the journey would crown the young bosun the first king of the new world, and he would usher in their new age of prosperity. King Hiro Namikaze.